Okay, so for those of you who don't know me, my name is Belle. I'm the fairly new project manager and commissioning editor at GNET. I have a background in public diplomacy and journalism, which ultimately led me to King's to pursue a master's in terrorism, security, and society, which I'm currently in the process of completing. So I'm really excited to be here and love working at GNET. So yeah, this panel I'm very excited about sharing. This is the last one of the day, and indeed of the conference. So I'm super lucky to have Suraj and Gabriel here with us, and of course, Linda online. So on this subject of gaming and radicalization, we have published, I believe, 8 insights, maybe more this year alone. And with our most recent webinar on May 14th, that was titled Digital Battlegrounds, Countering Radicalization on Gaming Adjacent Platforms. And Linda actually presented on this as well. So if you would like to, if you didn't manage to make it to that webinar and you would like to check that out, please just email me and I'll send you the recording. So yeah, just a word about this panel. Basically, I just want to say that extremists exploit gaming in various ways, not just developing their games, but in all sorts of ways. So we're going to hear more about that. I am not the expert. These are the experts, so I'm really excited to listen to them. And Linda wanted me to mention that gaming does not necessarily equal radicalization. Just because you game doesn't mean you're going to be radicalized. But obviously that's not the case all the time, which is why we are here. Yeah, so we'll kick things off with Suraj. And so Dr. Suraj Lakhani is a senior lecturer in sociology and criminology at the University of Sussex. He is an associate fellow at the Royal United Services Institute, a research fellow at Vauxhall, and an ambassador for women in games. Additionally, he is a part of the steering board of the Extremism and Gaming Research Network, Gaming Community of Practice Working Group at GIFCT, the European Working Group on Radicalization, Extremism, and Terrorism at the European Society of Criminology, as well as the UK Home Office's Accelerated Capability Environment Research Network. He's widely published in academic publications and international reports.
Thank you. Hi everyone, I'm Suraj. It's really lovely to be here, and I'd like to thank the organisers for inviting me and putting together such a fantastic event over the past 2 days and really interesting speakers. I'm going to unmute myself. So for my presentation today, I want to focus upon user reporting in online gaming and gaming adjacent platforms and spaces. But prior to that, I want to provide a little bit of a background to the issue and briefly outline the intersection or the nexus between video gaming and violent extremism. So, what do we know? Well, we know that of some other really profitable sectors, music, film, TV, gaming is the most profitable sector. It's estimated that revenues for 2024 are going to be in the region of 280 to 290 billion US dollars, a huge amount. It's not a niche market. Over 3.3 billion people around the world consider themselves to be gamers or play games. Caveat to that is the majority of these will be playing games on their mobile phones, like Candy Crush or Age of Civilizations, whatever it is. But around 1 billion people around the world are online gamers. A figure that's concentrated amongst 16 to 24-year-olds, but we do know that there are very, very young children who are also gamers as well. It was only a few weeks ago that my 6-year-old nephew came home from school talking about Roblox, which is quite scary, particularly as some of the material we found on Roblox. But we know young children are playing as well. We know there's a relatively equal gender split, 40 to 50% of gamers around the world are female, and the highest concentration of gamers are in the Asia-Pacific region. We also know that, people play video games for lots and lots of different reasons, for stress relief, fun, community building, but it's more than just entertainment for some people. It's part of their identity, it's part of their social networks, it's part of kind of their own mental health support as well. And just to kind of echo what Linda said, or Linda's comments that I relate to about There's no evidence to suggest that gaming is a causal factor of violence. There's similar conversations to what we had about rap music or violent films. But again, there is a caveat to that. There is some evidence to suggest that playing violent video games can desensitize some people to violence. Just some more data here, I won't go through in detail, but I'll leave it up on the screen for a moment or so. But these are online gaming spaces like Xbox Live, PlayStation, places where you can play and download and buy online games like Steam, and gaming adjacent platforms like Discord and Twitch. And you can see they have a huge number of users. So if we just take one of them, for example, Discord, there are 600 million registered accounts, 19 million servers, mostly private servers, and a whopping 150 million monthly users. And we can see that replicated in the tens and hundreds of millions as we go down that slide. So when it comes to the intersection between video gaming and violent extremism, there are a number of typologies of harm. On the slide, we can see a selection of them. There are a few more as well. Most of them have been discussed in various papers that we've written over the past couple of years. I won't go into them in detail now, but there is one in particular that I want to focus on, and that's labelled on the screen as, when I change the slide. Let me go back a second, just to show you the figures there, because I didn't change the slides. So we can see a huge amount of people using these online spaces and gaming adjacent platforms. Apologies. So there are a number of typologies of harm there. The one I want to focus on, as I've mentioned, is communication. So this is about the communication that occurs within online gaming spaces when people are playing multiplayer games, but also the communication that happens within gaming adjacent spaces as well, where people can voice chat with one another, they can text one another, they can share materials with one another, text, images, display particular profile pictures, bespoke avatars, etc., etc. But prior to that, it's worth talking about the types of harms that are involved with these online spaces. Again, look, we say that gaming overwhelmingly is really, really positive, but there are some kind of dark and nefarious activities that take place. This data is from some research that Linda and colleague Ammar conducted for the United Nations Office for Counterterrorism. A really interesting and important piece of research where they interviewed a large amount of gamers and asked them about their experiences online. And when I showed this particular bit of data, I always ask people to focus on the column on the right-hand side that says none at all. So when they ask gamers about, for example, how much misogynistic content they'd experienced online, only 18% said they'd experienced none at all, right? So testing my maths, 82% of people on various different scales had experienced some of this online, a huge amount. When we think about extremism, 67% of people had experienced some form of extremism online. Again, another caveat, we need to think about how people understand definitions of extremism. Of course, as academics, we need to think about this data in that way. But it still tells us a really compelling story, doesn't it? It still demonstrates the extent to which violent extremism is prevalent on these types of sites. What about the value of gaming? I'll go over this quite quickly. Well, violent extremists use gaming and gaming adjacent platforms and online gaming for a number of different reasons, whether it be strategic or organic in nature. One aspect is that it desensitizes people to particular types of ideological violence. There's also the dissemination of propaganda in particular ways that are considered to be fun and exciting. We can't underestimate how important fun and excitement are when we think about the existential attractions and the phenomenological foreground of violent extremism. It's something that's not talked about as much as it should do. So as well as this ideological commitment, do people find terrorism exciting? Well, there is a lot of evidence now to suggest that they do. So it provides exposure to particular types of ideologies people might not have come across, to different types of groups, providing awareness of them. There is a huge audience reach there. As I've mentioned, although games are a broad range of ages, a vast number are very, very young. So there's a real distinct possibility of reaching younger audiences there. I've mentioned this. I've kind of mentioned this as we've gone along, but the reinforcement of ideologies is also important. So not just attracting new members, not just disseminating your ideology to people who may not have come across it, but actually kind of reinforcing these ideas with people who may have already subscribed to your types of ideologies. Live streaming attacks, which we've all heard about. So we saw in Harley a 28-year-old man live stream himself on Twitch, trying to get onto the grounds of a local synagogue to murder as many people as possible. Thankfully, he wasn't able to do that, but he still managed to kill a couple of people on the streets. More recently in Buffalo, I think it was 10 African Americans in a supermarket who were gunned down. He live streamed his attack to Twitch. He also kept a really detailed diary and an attack plan on Discord, a gaming adjacent platform, which wasn't a private server, but he sent the links out to it 30 minutes before the attack. But we know it only takes a small amount of people watching these live streams for it to have a real devastating impact, right? So with Christchurch, for example, although it wasn't live streamed onto a gaming adjacent platform or a gaming site, it was live streamed onto Facebook Live. I think only a very small handful of people watched it. But within the first 24 hours, Facebook reported 1.5 million uploads that they'd taken down in 24 hours. YouTube, I think, said at one point they had one attempted upload per second, something they called unprecedented. And just 48 hours later, Facebook said they detected 800 visually distinct versions of video in 48 hours. So when we think about hash sharing databases, this makes people's jobs particularly hard when people are starting to modify these videos. It's also about communication as well, to speak to existing networks. Particularly as they are aware that gaming spaces may not be as monitored or well monitored as traditional social media platforms. The disruption activities may not be as strong as other social media platforms as well. And of course, reaching out to new recruits, which we've talked about, and to plan events as well. Charlottesville, January the 6th, planned on gaming adjacent platforms and live streamed to gaming adjacent platforms. Community building and strengthening new communities, but also strengthening existing communities. This is quite self-explanatory, so I won't go into too much detail. Radicalisation, recruitment and reinforcing as well. Sending people offline, from offline to online to spaces that they know may not be disrupted. Sending people across different parts of the gaming ecosystem or the non-gaming ecosystem to places that they feel are far safer. And to attract a new pool of recruits as well. And thinking about the online extremist extremist ecosystem as well. So how do we understand how different gaming platforms connect to one another? How do people migrate across different platforms? How does this online ecosystem connect to other online ecosystems, forums, websites, social media? And it's something that as academics we're really starting to understand a lot more as time goes on. But the kind of real crux of my presentation today, I want to think about what this means in terms of addressing youth radicalisation in gaming communities. One particular aspect of considering the intersection between video gaming and violent extremism that requires more attention is thinking about the user or the gamer themselves. So alongside some of the other approaches to counter this threat of violent extremism within this space, within these spaces such as disruption or takedown or PCB, which we're going to hear about later on, how could we need to think about how we can better encourage user and gamer reporting? User reporting is a really vital tool that needs to be given due attention. So for the main part of my presentation, I just want to focus on some of the considerations and pose some of the important questions that gaming companies really need to start thinking about. So that could be established gaming companies or emerging gaming companies. And you'd be surprised as to how neglected this particular aspect is. I'll go through these relatively quickly, but we can talk about them in more detail in the Q&A. So first is the importance of gaming. So it's imperative that gaming companies understand the importance of providing mechanisms for the reporting of hateful, abusive and extremist content, of course. With the proliferation of gaming, which we've talked about over the last few years, particularly during the pandemic, which we saw a spike, it's led to the rapid expansion of users for gaming companies. And some of the organizations who have really kind of accelerated their user database and the growth of their company, they're dealing with a huge amount of issues. And one of them is, of course, violent extremism as well. So there's some catching up to do compared to the policy strategies and mechanisms in place by social media companies, which most of us will agree aren't perfect, but they are pretty well advanced and developed. They still need a lot more work, but that's normal with this type of threat. But they're far more advanced as compared to gaming companies as well. So adequate systems need to be in place to allow gamers and users to be able to quickly and easily report both contentious material and other users who break terms of service and community guidelines, which I'll talk about in a moment. And also to do so in a way that facilitates trust and doesn't disrupt gameplay, again, something I'll talk about in a moment. But we also need to convey this importance of reporting to the users and gamers themselves, and there are different strategies in which this can be achieved, including creating educational materials and campaigns to inform gamers about the seriousness and the risks of extremism, particularly as we think about issues around everyday extremism. When you talk to gamers, they kind of say, well, I just don't bother listening to it anymore. I just hear misogyny and extremism on a day-to-day basis, so I just kind of just don't take much notice of it, but we need them to take notice of it. We also need to think about whether users fully understand how to report abuses. Do they understand how to flag content or other users? And this is particularly complex when we think about the exploitation by terrorists and violent extremist users as well. So we need to think about whether users can flag, report material and the behaviours of other players in kind of real-time immersive multiplayer games. And again, that's a responsibility of gaming companies supported by academics and policymakers to ensure that users and gamers are fully aware of how to report. What about the reporting tools? So gaming companies also need to ensure that reporting is user-facing, so these tools are user-facing. They're easy to find, they're easy to understand, and they're easy to use by players as well. They need to think through the different methods of reporting that can be implemented. Are some easier to implement than others in design? Do some encourage better reporting than others? Are there wider considerations around safety by design as well we need to think about as well? And are there lessons to be learned from the strategies implemented by other online platforms? What are the barriers to reporting? Well, some of the barriers to reporting are particularly around kind of in real-time immersive multiplayer games. So if we're asking gamers to report and they have to stop their online gaming, that will create some sort of barrier for them to be able to report, right? They're not going to want to stop their game halfway through. So are there other mechanisms where they can flag user content or behavior, which they can go back to at a later time? Because if they stop halfway through, that disrupts their own gameplay, that disadvantages them. They may be, chastised by their own gaming communities because they've let them down during a game. So we need to really think about how users report and the barriers as well. Does it negatively affect the gaming experience? I've kind of talked about that a little bit, and I'm kind of running out of time, so I'll go through this really quickly. And also increasing confidence in reporting as well, right? We shouldn't underestimate how important it is to increase confidence in reporting. How do you do that? Do gamers believe action will be taken? Will a person who's been reported, who's committed to quite a serious offence against the terms of service or community guidelines, be allowed back onto the platform? Will they be allowed back onto the platform under a different username? How do we convey this confidence to gamers that when they report, something will be done about it? And this is something that gamers really kind of struggle with and something that we need to address. And finally, there needs to be transparency in reporting as well. Gaming companies should endeavour to publish regular transparency reports dealing with kind of efforts to combat extremism, including stats on content removals and enforcement actions, etc., etc. And I know I'm over, but if you just give me a few more minutes, I will wrap up. Something important I want to talk about: terms of service and community guidelines. So we need to make sure, and this is really obvious to say, but it doesn't happen anywhere near as much as it should do. We need to ensure that gaming companies develop effective terms of service and community guidelines that really strictly and explicitly prohibit the promotion of terrorism and violent extremism. These guidelines in terms of service need to be accessible by the users upon account creation and periodically thereafter. They can look across different online spaces, social media, websites, to see how they've kind of constructed their terms of service. But at the end of the day, it needs to be quite individual to a particular platform. We also need to think about the guidelines in terms of terms of service and community guidelines in terms of private service. So when we think about Discord, 90 million private servers, usually moderated by a user with tens, hundreds, or thousands of different users within that private service. So how do we ensure these terms of service and community guidelines are implemented within private service? Something we don't need to worry about as much when we think about social media platforms, but something that gaming companies really need to think about. I promise I'm coming to the end, folks. We need to make these terms of service and community guidelines, they need to be structured in a particular way and open to researchers like ourselves, so we can scrutinise them, we can provide recommendations about how they can be improved. Again, obvious, but something that doesn't happen nearly as much as it should do. And there needs to be, of course, regular auditing and horizon scanning about the different types of threats. We know, particularly from far-right extremism, or the far-right extremists and jihadists to some extent, the landscape changes so fast. Ideologies, groups, tactics, sometimes change in the blink of an eye. So how do gaming companies ensure they are up to date with developments, and how do they reflect these within their terms of service and community guidelines? Again, that's through collaboration with academics, and something they need to think about in far more detail. How can they undertake this multi-pronged approach where they have a number of different stakeholders providing guidance and advice all the way through? And again, collaboration with wider organisations, which actually can provide them with guidance about how to construct terms of service and community guidelines as well. Okay, nearly done. Before I finish, I'd like to give a plug to the organisation, the network that I'm a part of, the Extremism and Gaming Research Network. If you're interested, we'd love to hear from you. We've got a website and social media channels as well. We've got a whole bunch of research that you can download and have a look at, and we've got over 140 members across policy, academia, tech companies, gaming companies. So if you're interested, we'd love to hear from you. I'm happy to answer questions after we've finished, but if you want to get in touch with me after the event, I'd be happy to hear from you. My email's up there. It's pretty easy to find online, but yeah, thanks for the extra time and thanks for listening.
Very interesting. I think you highlighted, it was very comprehensive. You highlighted so much, particularly the issue among how many gamers there are in the world, from Candy Crushers to all the way at the other end of the spectrum. I liked also your point about the fun aspect, how gaming is fun, and how this is a concern when you're being radicalized. You might not even realize it, you're just playing a game, as well as the aspect of sort of becoming numb to such extremist remarks. So that was very interesting. So we'll hear next from Linda. We'll jump in person online to keep everyone engaged and on their toes. So Dr. Linda Schlegel completed her master's here at King's College London in Terrorism, Security and Society before moving to Frankfurt for her PhD at Goethe University. She is currently a research fellow at Peace Research Institute Frankfurt, where she co-leads the RadiGame and analyzes radicalization processes and prevention initiatives on gaming and gaming adjacent platforms. Linda, I'll throw it to you.
Thank you so much, Belle. Do you want me to share the screen, or are you going to share it?
Yeah, if you can share the screen, that would be great.
Okay, perfect. I hope you can all see this.
Yes, we can see it crystal clear.
Perfect. Thank you so much, everyone. I'm just going to give a very quick introduction to our new project. It's called RadiGame, which is short for Radicalization on Gaming Platforms and Messenger Services. I'm just going to give an update sort of on our empirical research into the matter and what we have been up to. We are an all-German consortium that is rather diverse. As you can see on the screen, we have tried to include as many voices, as many perspectives as possible, all kinds of stakeholders. So we have academic institutions, NGOs and think tanks, law enforcement agencies, and members of the tech sector. The project is led by the Technical University in Berlin, a 3-year project, which has started in June last year. So we're just about right on the 1-year mark. So this is going to be an update on the first phase of the project, which is funded by the German Ministry of Education and Research. We have 3 pillars or 3 main areas that we are going to be looking at in the project. The first one is radicalization, sort of what do we know about radicalization processes in digital gaming spaces, where do they take place, how do these users communicate with each other, and how can we identify at-risk gamers or radicalized users? Are there any indicators that we can come up with in their communication to just understand whether someone is radicalizing or not, and how can we identify that? Which group and individual dynamics can contribute to radicalization in digital gaming spaces? We don't know a lot about that yet, so this is something that we aspire to look at. How do radicalized individuals network via these platforms? So we have different types of modes of interaction, let's say. You have channels, you have groups, you have individual users talking in chats. So how does that work? How do they network, and what are maybe the differences? And then we also have a project partner who's looking specifically at messenger services. So the last phase of the project aims to make a comparison, sort of what are the modes of interaction, communication processes that we see in messenger services versus what we see in gaming spaces, to see if we can learn from either of those in terms of adapting our tools to counter these processes. Law enforcement is another key pillar of what we're doing. We are asking, how can ethical surveillance and law enforcement activities look in digital gaming spaces while being in compliance with legislation of data protection frameworks? As you may know, the German data protection laws are among the most strict in the world, so this is really a concern for our context. How can law enforcement agencies even begin to understand gaming spaces if the barriers to entry are so high for them? What kind of tools can support law enforcement agencies? It's mainly our tech partner looking at that, sort of automatic detection or semi-automatic detection in compliance with the data protection frameworks. How can we help police services who cannot just go into these gaming spaces and be like, hey, we're just going to look around and see if we can find anything that is of interest to us? What kind of tools can be in place? And also, how can we identify illegal content, and obviously, particularly indicators of violence or of imminent attacks to sort of support prevention on the law enforcement side? And again, how can we manage cases? How can risk assessment be improved? All these sort of variables that are important for law enforcement agencies. And then how can we collaborate effectively with law enforcement agencies, particularly the collaboration between tech companies and law enforcement agencies? There's some friction there because of different country legislations that they are subjected to. but also how can PCVE practitioners work together with law enforcement agencies to have a sort of holistic approach to preventing any sort of violence. And then the third pillar is prevention. So what kind of PCVE programs already exist that are gaming related, and what kind of important gaps do we see? It's a very young field, so there's a lot of gaps that we can identify. We're also going to look at the challenges that PCVE practitioners face, because this is largely uncharted territory, and it comes with a set of specific challenges in the gaming sphere that I'm going to talk about in a second. We also ask, where's PCVE most needed? Suraj just talked about the problem of users not reporting that type of content. So we don't really know where we should start, let's say, with PCVE interventions. Where is that actually necessary? And where is it maybe also not necessary for us to go into gaming spaces? And how can we transfer existing approaches? How can we improve the approaches that we already have? And we're going to look at new innovative approaches that could be applied in the gaming sphere. And then we're going to have discussion around sort of what is promising, what should we maybe not do because the challenges or the barriers are too high. And then lastly, as I already said, how can PCVE practitioners collaborate effectively with other stakeholders who have a different set of principles and a different perspective on what we're talking about? Like I said, we're in the first phase of the project, or we just completed the first phase. So I'm just going to run you quickly through some initial findings, both on radicalization and on the prevention side. And then I'm very happy to discuss this further in the Q&A. What we did at PRIF, we looked at 20 gaming and gaming adjacent platforms. We explored, what type of access do we need as researchers to even look at that data? Can we find anything that's of relevance to us? Is it even part of the extremist gaming ecosystem, or is this forum not used, etc.? So we tried that, and we looked at communication platforms: Discord, Reddit, gamer uprising forums, Gilded, and Gametree. Gilded and Gametree we deemed not as relevant. That's why they're in parenthesis. We just couldn't locate enough relevant content to really say, yeah, this is something that we should be looking into further. Although I should say, particularly on Gilded, it was a problem of access, a problem of sort of we couldn't search the platform in the way that we wanted to. On the other three communication platforms, we found relevant content, although on Reddit, it wasn't always gaming related. So we also tried to look at sort of, is it propaganda or is it extremist content that is particularly gaming related and not just something that would also appear on Instagram, for instance. We also looked on gaming and mod platforms: Steam, ModDB, IndieDB, GameBanana, itch.io, and Roblox. And we found relevant content on all of these platforms, suggesting that sort of the real gaming and mod platforms are hosting a lot of extremist activities. And then we looked at video and streaming platforms. Twitch, Kick, DLive, and YouTube included a lot of, or hosted a lot of extremist content that was gaming related. On Rumble, BitChute, and TikTok, we found relevant content that wasn't necessarily gaming related though, so we kind of excluded these and said they're maybe not as relevant to what we're doing. And on OnlyFans, as you can imagine, we had some problems of access because we couldn't exactly pay for content or to watch content. We tried to find the sort of gaming influencers that would also spread propaganda on OnlyFans. There is gaming content, but we couldn't access anything that was relevant. That doesn't mean OnlyFans doesn't host this type of content. It just means that you would have to pay for it, and we can't do that in a publicly funded research project. Other important findings: we found right-wing extremism, white supremacy, conspiracy narratives, anti-Semitism, racism, LGBTQ hate, manosphere and incel content relatively easy. So all we didn't use an API or anything. We just went into the search bar and tried to locate relevant content, just like a normal user might. And this stuff was relatively easy for us to locate. Islamist and jihadist content, less so. That means that it's not as openly displayed as content, particularly right-wing content. But of course, the question is it better hidden or is it not present on these platforms? That's something we couldn't determine in our quick explorations, but it's definitely a question that we should be asking. We also found a general lack of research on gaming adjacent platforms. We tried to do a literature review, but there's not much out there. So we're missing a research baseline, if you will, for our radicalization research. So what we are going to need to do in the next phase is to establish that baseline first to then be able to look at radicalization processes. And lastly, we found that mod forums are highly relevant, maybe of all the platforms that we looked at, the most relevant, but very under-researched. Mods is something that comes up time and time again when we have these discussions, but there doesn't seem to be any empirical research on these forums yet. So that's going to be our next step. We've selected mod forums to go forward in phase 2 and sort of look at them in more depth to try to find out more about this under-researched area. And just very briefly, initial findings on prevention. So there are 4 main objectives that we have in that sort of research pillar. We want to identify challenges for PCVE. We're going to do interviews with practitioners to learn more about their experiences, their needs, struggles, ideas for improvement with that kind of, in that kind of space. We're also going to be mapping existing approaches, gaps, etc., what I talked about before. And next year, we are going to implement innovation labs, trying to take PCVE and the gaming sphere to the next level, if you will. Our initial findings are the challenges for PCVE practitioners, and there are quite a few. First is knowledge challenges. So we're missing subcultural knowledge. A lot of PCVE actors say gaming. Well, I played Tetris in the 80s kind of thing. And that's sort of the baseline of knowledge that we have there. And that needs to be improved. Then we already talked about, we don't know where PCVE is most needed, lack of reporting, that kind of stuff. And research largely focuses on right-wing extremism. So that's the baseline we're working with. But as we said, we don't know if Islamist content is just better hidden in these spaces. So this is something that PCVE also needs to grapple with and relies on research to solve. And there are technical challenges. I mean, this sounds quite banal, but you need technical know-how, you need game design knowledge and gamification expertise to produce PCVE interventions with gaming components. And it's not something that the regular PCVE practitioners is going to have. And equipment, that too sounds so like we don't even need to talk about that. But if you want to do a live streaming event, or if you want to implement a gaming tournament or whatever your PCVE intervention is going to be, you need the technical equipment, which costs money, which is always a problem in PCVE. We also have practical challenges, particularly in terms of accessing the necessary spaces that we would have to access. So in order to be in in-game chats, you have to play with the people who are playing there, right? And often these chats happen after kids are done with school or people are done with work. So you have to work out of hours. So it's really difficult just to access these spaces when it's most needed. This is also true for live streams, which are often deleted immediately when they're done. So you would have to be there in real time to actually do anything about this in terms of PCVE. And then we have a lot of voice-based communication, which is difficult to moderate anyways. And again, what do you do? Voice-based PCVE in real time in that chat, what is that going to look like? Or what can that even look like? There are ethical and data protection challenges that I already hinted upon. A lot of these spaces are private or semi-private communication spaces. Can we go in there? Who can go in there? When? And then the issue of minors who obviously have particular protection. And we don't know if these people that we're dealing with are actually minors, and how are we going to decide how we go about that. And lastly, as I already touched upon, there are challenges in cooperation, both with law enforcement and with gaming and tech companies, where PCVE actors told us, like, we don't even know how to approach this issue. We don't know how to bring it up. So this is something that needs to be improved. I'm going to end on my favorite meme about this, that I end any presentation on gaming and extremism with. I think it's really important that we are aware that there are extremist activities in digital gaming spaces, and extremists are trying to exploit these spaces, but that doesn't mean we need to panic. Actually, gaming is also an opportunity to improve our PCVE work, to make it more interesting, to go where all these users are on gaming and gaming adjacent platforms. And that's sort of what I want to leave you with. Thank you so much. You're welcome to contact us. I'm also happy to send the presentation around. We have a report that's come out in German, but GNET is going to publish 2 English summaries in the next weeks. So if you're interested to learn more about our exploration, feel free to check those out or ask any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. You touched on a lot of interesting challenges. The barriers to entry was really interesting. From the OnlyFans, yeah, I don't think the German government wants to pay to get into those accounts, as well as the more practical barriers to entry of being on the live stream at the right time. Yeah, so that was very interesting. Our final panelist, we have Gabriel Gomes, and he holds a postgraduate degree in systems thinking from Open University and serves as the head of the senior creative director at Purpose Brazil, a global creative agency for social impact. He has 15 years of experience in civic engagement, storytelling, mentorship, and concept creation, having taken positions such as Red Bull's Social Innovation Marketing Manager and membership with the Global Shapers Community and Social Good Brazil Link. So, Gabriel, we're happy to have you and looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you very much. Can I have the clicker, please? Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for this opportunity to share some of the work we've been doing in Brazil. I'm Gabriel Gomes, as Belle said, creative director and head of office at Purpose Brazil. For those who doesn't know, Purpose is a global creative agency focused on social impact projects, working on the intersection of strategy, creativity, campaigning, and engagement on issue areas such as climate change, human rights, early childhood, and more recently, AI and democracy. Our mission is to inspire people to reimagine the world in a moment where we are living so many crises. It's hard to have hope. It's hard to believe that things are going to get better. But as communicators, we work on narratives to reinforce this possibility in people's minds. And not only reimagine the world, but also harness their ability to make it happen. And that's where engagement and mobilization come in. So I'm sharing today 3 case studies and some insights with you of projects that we've had the opportunity to run during the elections of 2022 in Brazil. And probably you may know that just like in many other countries in Brazil, the elections were highly polarized. We had 2 icons fighting for the presidency. In one side, Bolsonaro, in the other side, Lula. Bolsonaro, the current president, trying re-election, known for his far-right policies, actions, and narratives. And on the other hand, Lula, that had been president twice, got arrested, got released, and then was running for his 3rd term. Fortunately, he won. We wouldn't be able to have more 4 years of Bolsonaro in Brazil. But what we knew at that moment was that the integrity of Brazil's election, Brazil's democracy institutions was at risk. Democracy was at risk. So that was an election that actually was a test for the resilience of our democracy in the country. Polls were indicating that the tide would be that the race would be super tight, and every vote would count, especially among key audiences such as faith communities, women, and youth. So what we was also seeing was that some politicians were starting to incorporate gaming aesthetics to their narratives and strategies. Maybe you've seen that in your country, in your city, but some of them are bringing some of the narrative, playing games, creating games, changing the way they appeal to the young audience. So we thought that not only 2022 elections in Brazil were important, but there was a specific change in the approach to the youth that we needed to pay attention to. Also, when we see the data of Brazilian gamers, we noticed that there was a huge growth in users. Now, almost 75% of Brazilians that have access to internet has some kind of relationship with digital games. And some of these people spend 4, 6, 8, 12 hours, sometimes playing, sometimes watching someone play, sometimes just interacting with their communities online and these adjacent platforms. So for us, as we had like this democracy portfolio at Purpose, we knew that we needed to do something related to games and youth to protect democracy in 2022. So we decided to start an initiative inside this portfolio democracy called the Gamer Impact Lab. And the Gamer Impact Lab is a mission-driven hub that connects gamers and content creators to produce campaigns and launch creative ideas to occupy socialization spaces in the gaming communities. We do not create games because creating games is too expensive, take a lot of time, is part of naivety to believe that people will play our game. And it's hard to imagine creating many games to talk about different topics, such as protecting the Amazon or protecting democracy or protecting childhood in online spaces. So we thought that would be more strategic, instead of creating games, to occupy the spaces where people already are and gamers already are, such as Twitch, Discord, Instagram accounts and stuff like that. But the main goal is to dismantle hate speech, to fight extremism, to fight racism, to fight misogyny, LGBTQ phobia on those spaces, because we know that gamers, mainly youth, are super exposed to that, and that creates like a very tense ecosystem where extremists start to dominate the space because people don't want to fight back. So the Gamer Impact Lab was created because we do believe that this ecosystem is one of the most creative, vibrant, and engaged ecosystem that there is. We've seen how much the gaming market has grown, and we need to use that for good somehow. But we need people creating projects and trying experiments, launching their initiatives. We need ideas. Not only we need to use all of your research to find insights so we can actually put in practice and test all those hypotheses. And at Purpose, we are trying to test some of the hypotheses. So what we want to do is actually to use those gaming spaces, use those socialization spaces to engage youth, to protect democracy, to promote positive social participation, and to leverage their power to make change, not only on screens, but off screens as well. So the first thing that we needed to do once we decided that we wanted to work with gamers was to understand what kind of gamers there are in Brazil. We cannot say that every gamer is the same. The first image that comes to our mind is that the gamer is a white guy playing in his computer at home with purple, pink or blue lights. But in Brazil, this is not the right image. Brazil, as you know, is a very diverse country, and most of the people don't look like this image that when we search on Google for gamers, is the first one that appears. So we wanted to know who are they, what they believe, what are their connections to politics, how do they see politics in Brazil, what are their behaviors? So we ran with Box 1824, which is a research company in Brazil focused on young people between 18 and 24 years old to explore those profiles and hopefully create some personas. And we found out that there are at least 6 types of personas in the gaming community. This is something that we can.
Sorry.
I can do that.
I did it. That's good.
All right. We were trying to organize and clusterize some of the profiles that we've identified after more than 200 interviews. And we found out that there are these 6 profiles: the questioners, the harmonics, the escapists, occasionals, the meme creators, and the medallists. Unfortunately, this presentation is not about this research, but I have translated it to English, and I am happy to share with you if you want this research to read in depth. Please reach out to me. You can find this research on gamerimpactlab.com. Again, it's in Portuguese, but I have a document in English and I can share with you in person. But just to give a quick summary of what those profiles mean. The questioners are the gamers that usually represent the underrepresented groups. They use gaming as a platform to voice their struggles against societal injustice. They seek refuge in the gaming communities. They are often finding acceptance and visibility among their similar in these gaming spaces. And they are the questioners. They are questioning the system. We all know some people like that. The harmonics, they value tolerance, harmony, respect. They avoid conflict. They prefer gaming environments where there are inclusive and cooperative interactions. The escapists, they are the ones that are trying to disconnect from reality that they often see as disappointing or unchangeable. They prioritize fantasy games where they can play different identities and they can create a relationship with these alternative realities. Occasionals, like me, I am an occasional. I play games as a casual pastime. I try to balance gaming with other entertainment forms, such as movies, series, music. Meme creators are the ones focused on humor and fun within the gaming community. They are averse to serious and complex discussions. They prefer to keep things light and entertaining. And many of the times the memes are okay, but they are the ones that create the kind of content that we need to seek and to say that that content is violent. We need to remove that. They are the trolls, creating and sharing content that sometimes is the source of the problems of mis and disinformation. And the medallists, finally the medallists, that are those gamers that are highly competitive. They want to win. They go to a game to win the game. They know everything about the game. Gaming spaces are their place. They feel at home when they are gaming. They have sometimes aggressive behaviors. They use violence as a strategy to win most of the times. So meme creators and medallists, you will find them walking together. Of course, we cannot say that one person is one thing. This is like a merge, right? You cannot say that one person is a medalist and is not a questioner. But what we try to do here is just to categorize so we can better understand how is their relationship with politics and the main behaviors behind that. Again, I'm glad to share with you this research, but it's not about that today. what I'm here to share is 3 case studies that we have developed based on this data, based on these insights, looking for the 2022 elections in Brazil. So in the months leading to the presidential election, polls were showing that female voters were more likely to reject conservative candidates and more inclined to be progressive-minded with progressive-minded ideas. How so? Women were more likely to believe that their vote didn't count on that election. So having high abstentions rates in the first round of the election, and that was a concern for us because we needed the women votes to win Bolsonaro. So increasing voter turnout among women became like a priority for purpose, not for purpose, but for many civil society organizations that were focusing on women communications. So we decided to create this online RPG campaign played only by women with 6 highly influential content creators and gamers in Brazil, coming from different backgrounds, white women, black women, indigenous, trans women, playing as this campaign that they needed to team up to fight a common enemy that was known for his personality traits of authoritarian, dictatorial, disrespectful to minorities. And the biggest weapon of this enemy in this game was spreading disinformation. So the whole point of this idea was to create like a story where people would watch from the third person, a story that was pretty similar to what was happening in Brazil. We had 60,000 people watching simultaneously on Twitch, plus 2 million people being reached on their social medias. And the result was great in terms of reaction, positive reaction. The best comment that we had is like the name of the city that these characters are trying to protect could easily be called Brazil, but we didn't even say that that was Brazil or that we were fighting Bolsonaro or something like that. But that was the main insight behind the script that we have created. The cost of production of this idea, $0, just an idea and some time spending creating the contest and the story. The second case study I want to share with you is activating center and center-right youth young audiences. 2022 was also when Brazil was celebrating 200 years of independence. And some conservative groups were preparing like a huge celebration on the streets, using this moment to promote Bolsonaro. And all those celebrations had like appearance of a coup once it was being organized also by the military forces. So the opposition needed to be very careful because any kind of clash on the streets would strengthen the coup intent. And also the opposition was thinking how to create another protest on the streets, maybe 3 days later, 2 days later, to mobilize more people than what the Bolsonaro was trying to mobilize. But that could backfire if they fail to mobilize more people to go to the streets. So the opposition and the civil society organizations decided to do nothing on the streets. Instead, do their best to deflate the movements on the streets. So they found different approaches to engage people in other activities, such as doing cultural tours on the city, spending time with the family, and each organization tried a different approach. Our idea was to mobilize gamer streamers that would not stream on that day to create like special live streams, so they could take some of the young people that might go to the streets to stay at home watching the game sessions, the live stream sessions. We invited 50 streamers, 21 agreed to be part of the project, more than 170,000 viewers simultaneously. None of them were paid to participate. Again, cost of production, $0. We planned this action in 1 week. And again, we believe that this idea took some people out of the streets and focused on letting them at home. And the final case study is around creating content and sharing content on Discord, engaging content creators and gamers to produce like a powerhouse for influencers to find content that they could use before the second round of elections. So this idea became like a hub where gamers could actually find content to share on their Twitter account, Twitch, Discord account, Instagram, TikTok. We found like trusted voices where they could be like the ones that were most engaging the community. 35 content creators, 85 players running this hub in 2 weeks. And one of the most viral piece of content was created by one of the members of this community that used Star Wars as the insight, because Star Wars is really popular in the gaming community. And they created this post like, I'm a Jedi and I support Lula. They marked Mark Hamill, the guy who actually played Luke Skywalker. The next day he retweeted that, and Lula retweeted that and engaged in the conversation. Social listening, monitoring showed that this piece of content was actually one of the best examples of how to create content that can reach both sides of the spectrum and mainly connect with undecided voters, because it's something that connects with something that people like. So some of the insights pretty quickly, 1 minute. The importance of gamification and creating mission-driven communities. You may know that gamification is used by extremists and radicalization groups to generate enthusiasm for these people that might be potential new recruiters. We can use gamification and mission-driven communities as well. So the whole idea behind this concept is that we need to find ways to let people tell stories together. Radicalization is pretty much a format of isolation. So when we create stuff that people can tell the story together, we strengthen our capacity to make change. The second insight is trying to beat radicalism with creative moves and team spirit. Again, reinforce the collective power. Gamers like to work together. Gamers like to believe they are part of the community. And when you give like a mission, when you give like something for them to try to do together, this is like a fuel for their creativity and cleverness and team spirit. And lastly, but not least, joining the community is so important. It's so hard to engage gamers if you are not a gamer, if you don't know the codes, the symbols, if you don't know how the system works. So if you are trying to create any kind of project with gaming communities, you need to have like a pro gamer in your team, because that changes everything. We hired one of the best gamers in Brazil in the game Valorant. He's top 500 in the world. So she knows absolutely everything about the gaming community. And that's it. So those are the three main insights based on our case studies. Again, we are trying to practice some of the things that you've been researching. Being part of the GNET, it's so crucial for us to understand what kind of topics we need to work on. This year, we have municipal elections, and it's going to be so hard to engage gamers on 5,000 cities in Brazil, but we are trying to do something like that, but we are preparing the field for the 2026 elections that will be hard as well. So thank you so much for your time, and I'm available for questions and conversations later. Thank you.